In life, we only have so much time, and being conscious, deciding how you want to spend it, is the privilege that's afforded to you as a conscious being. However, most of us spend our life in unconscious behavior patterns. In this episode, me and my friend Chris Giacchio talk all about the difference between conscious behavior and unconscious behavior, and give you some practical tools on how you can begin to become more aware and wake up to the passing of time. We also talk about individual experiences that have reminded us very strongly of just how special life is, and that we should be using it in accordance with a purpose, something that feels meaningful, not just for things that get celebrated with social approval or money. Thanks so much for listening or watching this episode. Please don't forget to rate the show. It helps us distribute this to a lot more people. Let's go ahead and hop in. I'm really interested, man, to have this conversation with you about what your life has looked like, and in the last years, as you talk about, we talked a little bit before the episode, talked about growing in consciousness and having some moments of waking up and having some moments of going, what the fuck am I doing?
Right.
There's a little Carl Jung, dripped into that conversation, so I'm excited about it.
Very, very much so. Carl Jung is probably the inspiration for the journey that I recently begun. And going back to consciousness, I think that a big part of it is understanding what consciousness is, and I think that most people don't, and most people even less understand the unconscious. So, if you think about it, if you think about the programming that takes place in our lives, the first 9 years of our life, and this is something that psychologists agree, that's the programming that instills our behaviors through the rest of our life. And that's what's implanted in our unconscious. So now you're talking about routines, and you're talking about habits, and you're talking about things that you do over and over again that play out and out over and over again.
Yeah.
Those are unconscious. Those are the things that we learn from those early years of our life when we're formative, and they keep occurring. And that's one of the biggest things for me is 40 some odd years later, I realized I'm still doing the things that I learned when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that talk about how hard it is to reprogram that, but it's really not, because science has shown us that neuroplasticity gives us that option. Yeah. You just have to do the work. And that's where, shadow work comes in, all the different methods that I'm sure we'll talk about. But it's integration. It's integration of the conscious and the unconscious that allows you to break that barrier, so your routines become choices. They're no longer the things that you just do because you just do them.
By default, yeah.
Exactly. We're not robots. We weren't meant to be robots. I think, and this goes back to understanding ancestry, and everyone's ancestry. I think I give them a lot more credit than most people do. I think they understood things a lot better than we do. Because things were simpler and they had more time to really explore the inner mind. And I think that they had a better integration of the conscious and unconscious than we ever could, because we're so bombarded with all these thoughts and all these directives that society programs us with.
Yeah, man, when you talk about the first 9 years of life, the term that comes to mind is theta waves, I think is the term, that is the state that the brain is in, the type of waves, alpha waves, theta waves. Yep. It's a not sleep state. It's like a pre-sleep state. It's almost like a hypnotic state.
Right.
That I believe, and I'll fact check this. If you're listening to this, I will interrupt myself right now to tell me if it's bullshit or not. But I think that that's what's going on for the first 7 years of your life, is your brain is in this you are Chris. I am Chris. Yep. You don't like this. You're like, I don't like this. You believe that God is this. God is this. You're receiving information, and you don't have anything to filter it through.
Right.
There's nothing that goes like, I don't know about that, or that doesn't seem fair, or that doesn't feel true. You don't have that. I mean, you're 1, 2, 3, you're 5 years old. And most times, like you said, our behaviors, our routines, our jobs, our partners, our religion are just this lifelong echo of what the first 9 years of our life looked like. And your routine being a choice is a beautiful way to say that, man.
Exactly.
A wonderful way to say that.
And it's simple. It opens up that door. I'll go a little bit into my first, 9 years of, and I'm, this could be a little conspiratorial for some people, but I think that a lot of this is by design, because if society programs, all the people within it to, just act out a certain way, it's a lot more manageable. And, I'm not saying the Matrix has us, but we're definitely being led down a certain path. My first early years of life were heavily influenced by Roman Catholicism, and it was a very oppressive, heavy weight on do this, don't ever do this, and don't question why.
Yeah.
Something within me, and this is something I attribute to my ancestry, and the years and thousands of years of pagan, heathen ancestry that came before me, that allowed a certain amount of cultural resonance to protrude through those years, caused me to question these things. And that's not, I can't. That's what they call unsubstantiated personal gnosis. I can't say that that's what caused me to question everything, but I believe it did, because I never wholeheartedly bought into this is the only way. You know what I mean?
I sure did.
I saw that shit hold, man.
Well, I mean, it did, but it was such a struggle and such a fight. So I'm also one extreme or another. You could say that I have an addictive personality because I go to an extreme with things, and that's very true. So when I did buy into it, I bought into it wholeheartedly. But
The Catholic stuff.
yeah, but also at the same time, I also understood that there was this other side, this other extreme side that existed. And for me, because within the parameters that I understood at a very young age, you had God and you had Satan. So you had the good guys and the bad guys. You had the light and the dark. And so eventually my inquisitive personality started to become just as interested in the dark as I did the light. And so witchcraft and, different aspects of Satanism started to become very interesting to me. And it wasn't until years later that I realized there were options. It took
Outside of this,
yes,
either
outside
I'm
the
good like Jesus or I'm bad like the devil.
exactly.
I change every day.
And that in itself became defined completely different, good and bad, good and evil, because morality is not a universal concept. Depending where you go, who you talk to, morals change.
Yeah.
So in order for me to evolve, I had to completely cleanse myself of those years. And for a long time, I made an enemy of the church, an enemy of, that doctrine. I sought to, convert people and tell them this wasn't the way.
Away from it.
Yeah, exactly. And then I realized I was still wasting time, spinning my wheels, doing something that was not productive for me.
Why do you think we do that? I know that that's something I've dealt with, is coming out of the church going, what the hell? This is not cool. Like, this isn't right. This isn't true. And then kind of starting to proselytize on the side of not being a Christian. It's like, I just went to ministry in a different degree. Why do we do that? What's your experience on that, instead of spending time waking up from it and going like, oh, like I don't have to live as a result of other people's thinking and decisions. I can be free.
Right. So most of us come out of it like a splash of cold water in our face, and it's a knee-jerk reaction. You know what I mean? We just got the realization that we were just bamboozled for all these years, and that's like, that's a word that just came to my head.
We've been bamboozled, baby.
And we're mad about it. You know what I mean? So we're going to take action.
Justify.
And that's,
we're going to make this right.
And that's kind of what happened with me. And I think that a lot of people are like that. It's just like what do you do when you come out of a very long, bad relationship?
Talk shit about him.
Exactly. That person's the enemy. If you're my friend, you don't be his friend or her friend too. You know what I mean?
There's something really developed and mature about the person that finishes a relationship with someone, even though it was shitty, and goes like, like I bow out. Let me bow out. It's a term that my therapist uses quite often, and he borrowed it from someone. I wish I could remember the name of that person right now, but he coined that term very specifically talking about romantic relationships and long-time relationships, of bowing in and bowing out. Mm-hmm. And that feeling of leaving something that was difficult for you and still honoring it and saying, I was not a victim in this scenario. That's a tough thing to talk about. But I wasn't. As I'm waking up to my own personal power over my life, I realize that I'm not a victim. I realize that relationship, although was hellish and horrible and life draining, it wasn't happening at me and to me, but something that my own ignorance, my own lack of understanding, my own lack of development as a person caught me up in.
Right.
And so I have the opportunity to be grateful in a way, to see that there are ways that I can be better. Better is a hard word, but better, ways
Sure.
that I can develop, and the ways that I can become more aware of how I entangle myself in these situations that are shitty, and some people would say that they just happen to teach you a lesson so that you can grow closer to being more and more like the divine.
I agree. And it's funny because talking about this, like, it brings to mind behavioral patterns that I've exhibited and even just recently started to break. And a perfect example is the one you just mentioned about coming out of a relationship and being, okay with that person, and realizing, and it took me being in a 4-year relationship with someone who was very important to me, and I hurt, and her being able to forgive me taught me so much about life and about what I should be capable of doing myself. And that's something that it's probably the most important lesson I've learned in my later life.
Tell me about it.
So we were together for 4 years. It was a very good relationship. I became complacent, as I do with a lot of things. It became something where and this is my own ignorance of how relationships are actually supposed to be. I think, a lot of people have this idea that a relationship is supposed to be hyper romantic and full of zeal every day for the rest of your life, and don't realize that you're going to have points at which you're just existing and looking towards that next, glorious moment, which will happen, but you have to work towards that. Sometimes it's work, sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's effort.
There's an ebb and flow.
Exactly. And I got complacent with it being in an ebb and started looking towards other things.
Other partners?
Not at first, but eventually, like, the options were out there, and I started to question, is like this where I really should be? And it got to the point where I felt, and maybe I convinced myself of this, maybe this was my own personal misconception that I deceived myself, that I told myself that I was doing her a justice by letting her go, that I was doing her a favor because she could find something more fulfilling, and that I could too. But in doing that, I selfishly, made all the decisions without ever considering how she felt, and
Part of that relationship.
yeah,
Being
and,
part of a relationship.
yeah, and seeing someone hurt that much was worse than anything I've ever done to anyone. Like, I've been an MMA fighter. I've been all these street fights, tough guy, bouncer for 10 years and all that stuff, physically put people through pain. Nothing could ever compare to the emotional hurt that I saw this person go through. And it made me realize that...
Partner.
What's that?
The person you're with.
Yeah, my partner at the time. Made me realize that it made me realize I'm not the person that I believed I was. It would be easier for me to say that I can't sugarcoat that. Yeah. You know what I mean? Everybody always told me that I was this higher being, this higher level person, and that I was the quintessential good guy and all this, and I believed that, even though my actions throughout my life definitely spoke differently. That one particular instance showed me
Brought
my
you back
true
down to reality.
self. Yes. And it made me realize that I was capable of doing something that I did not want to admit that I was capable of. Yeah. Hence, realizing the shadow.
Yeah. The shadow creeps into the
conversation. Yes. So
Carl Jung has entered the chat.
Yes. Carl Gustav. So going through that,
How long ago was that? Sorry to interrupt you.
Probably about 4 years ago. So
4 years ago, a relationship that you had been in for 4 years start?
No, let's go. My timeline's always a little bit off, probably closer to 5.
So 5 years ago,
Yeah.
a relationship you've been in for about 4 years came to an end.
Yep.
And it taught you a lot about yourself, where you saw that you were capable of being less than human.
Yes, yes.
Or human, you know.
But more importantly, despite all that, and despite the enormous amount of emotional pain and everything that she went through, she is now, at this moment, one of my best friends today. And she's actually asked me to speak at her and her future husband's wedding. She attended my wedding recently, last year.
You got married last year.
Yep.
Congratulations, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, that's interesting. I want to hear about this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's crazy the way, that happened, because I say it's bad because it was a hurtful experience, but if it didn't happen, maybe I would have gone on believing that I was something I wasn't.
Yeah.
I
really want to make sure to make this something that's relatable and where people can see in their life where the ideas of shadow work or shadow integration could be, where the opportunity lies for them. They might listen to this episode and go like, they could relate. They go, yeah, I mean, I've been through some tough stuff too, and I've done things I didn't think I was capable of. But where did this begin to become the intro for you into a new school, like a new lesson where you go like, oh man, okay, so I'm consciously taking myself through routines and keeping this idea of Chris alive. But there's this other dimension to my personality that seems to pull some greater strings. One way that I heard someone describe it one time about the conscious and the unconscious mind is the conscious mind is like an ant going, one direction on the back of an elephant, and the elephant's the unconscious mind.
Right.
And the ant says like, I'm headed this way, and he feels all happy about it. But little does he know the whole time he's going the exact opposite direction. Right. For me, beginning to my life showing me places that I'm caught up because of deeply unconscious behaviors and ideas about myself has been so helpful. It's been so helpful to begin to bring awareness to unconscious parts of my personality, ways that I find myself, like I love the quote by Carl Jung that if the shadow or demons is, a term that's used often for suppressed personality traits, if it's not faced head on and integrated directly, then it'll appear in your life as fate.
Right.
So if you find yourself in situations that are frustrating and even counter to who you think you are, where could our listener begin to go like, oh, this might begin a whole new process that they're discussing called shadow work?
Mm-hmm. So I think that the word consciousness and being conscious sums that up pretty well, because most people, and we talk about the routines, right? We're set up, we're doing this. Most people don't think about what they're doing. They go through these motions. When the emotional triggers that occur in daily life happen, we have defense mechanisms set up to deal with those. And those defense mechanisms are usually the lowest hanging fruit, because it's like, hey, this is how I deal with this every time, and it works. But the same thing keeps happening over and over again. So is it working?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So identifying triggers is what's biggest for me. And I'll tell you right now, I am far from enlightened. I am far from transcended. I still deal with this. I dealt with it yesterday. When I have these triggers, I have to identify them quick, and then.
What do you mean?
So
like a trigger. What is an example?
So a trigger is, for me, it could be a statement, a word, especially a word that somebody says, like the same person says it over and over again, sets me off. And like I've had anger issues in the past, and still something I still deal with, and I become very angry to the point where it's not healthy.
The defense mechanism is the anger.
Yes, exactly.
And you're starting to, it's cool. You're starting to find where that almost uncontrollable. It's deeply rooted. It's been there for a long time, longer than your conscious mind has.
Right. It's primal.
Yeah, and it's a reactive thing that happens. You're starting to gain some awareness on what activates it, and then maybe giving it yourself the chance, the space, the mindfulness, the pause to decide whether you want to engage defense mechanisms, destroy.
That's the biggest thing, is just take a step back. And for anybody listening, that's my recommendation. Anytime you feel that trigger, perfect example, and this is not me, this is what I think most society does, scrolling on social media and they see something that is, completely against their identity, their beliefs, their whatever their stance is, and they get triggered. And all of a sudden their first reaction is to get in that comment section and unload, right?
Yeah.
Instead, take the phone, put it down, and try to just give yourself a few minutes. Don't try to rack your brain trying to understand why you just felt the way you felt. Just take that time, empty space. That's where we truly exist.
It's a really good, just do it kind of slogan. Just not. Just take a second.
Yeah. Because action is always the initial reaction. And sometimes it's not. Yeah. Sometimes a reaction is not reacting. And that's where we're.
Sometimes it's not responding. I love that rephrase of don't react, respond.
Yeah.
Give yourself the time to feel it, to think about it for a second, and to respond to what happened or what you saw or not. Or you might even go, why the fuck am I even trying to drop in this comment? I don't need to be in this comment section.
Right.
I'm trying to rip this guy's throat open. I don't even know him.
That's what happened to me. I was doing something important one time and I took a break to scroll, and then I realized, that I was triggered and I was about to make a comment, and I was like, wait a minute, I was just doing something important.
Yeah.
This is taking away from that. And that's how it happens. But if you just take that instant to just allow yourself some space, and I won't even say don't repress the emotion, because that's bad. That's how you end up in more trouble. Let it flow. Let it work through you, feel it, understand it, embrace it even. And then through that, you'll gain the understanding of where that emotion truly came from. Yeah. And 9 out of 10 times, you're going to find something about yourself that is more important, I guess the word is, than what you actually saw that caused you to have this reaction. People always say that, the things that you dislike about other people are usually the things that you dislike about yourself. When I heard that, I got mad, because it was the initial reaction of not wanting to admit that it's true, but it is.
So this is a great point of, if you're listening to this and you want to get a microcosm of this whole conversation, it's that when you see something inside of someone else that you don't like, often it can be something you've repressed inside yourself.
Sure.
Someone else expresses their needs and you call them a needy bitch. You're like, will you just shut the fuck up? You're always needing something.
Yep.
And becoming more conscious, becoming more aware, like Chris is talking about, means taking the time to not just consider it your full-time job to react to things, but to consider your life as something to be learned about, and see the way you respond to things and make notes about it. I noticed this person when they always need stuff, and they're so needy, and I think they're a little bitch. Take note of that. And then you have some data. And then when you take concept like a Carl Jung, some of his philosophies, something like the things you don't like in others often can be repressed traits in yourself. And then you go, well, let me review my notes. And then you go back and look around and you go oh my God, Tracy's a needy bitch. Maybe I'm a needy bitch. maybe in me, I've labeled myself a needy bitch and I've suppressed that. Maybe, and what I'm saying by this is that maybe someone else expressing their needs is something you wish you could do and you don't feel that you're able to. And so instead of going deep down into the years and years and years ago and unlatching this deeply held belief and freeing yourself of the ability to express your needs and be reciprocated, getting emotional nourishment, instead, you just demonize people who do the thing you can't do. And I'm not saying that's always the case. I mean, you don't look at something like the Columbine shooting and go, look, those guys are fucking stupid. Well, it's because you want to shoot up a school. Not necessarily. But it's a great tool to become more aware. A great tangible tip would be to be mindful, notice how you react to things, and then take a tool like suppression could be the reason that you dislike traits in other people, and use that as a way to possibly arrive in a more conscious state.
Sure. I mean, it's funny because you just made me think about why I get so aggravated with people in the gym who don't work hard, or they're lazy, or they're on the bench on their phone or something like that. And it's because, I realized I'd get so frustrated and just angry at these people and call them all kinds of dirty names in my head, or just like be rude to them. And I realized that, they're enjoying doing something far more than I am, because for me, it's work. For me, working out, training for, my competitions, whatever I'm doing at that point in time, it's not a hobby. I'm not an enthusiast. I put everything I can into it. And the enjoyment is the result at the end. But I look at other people and they're enjoying the process itself. And deep down inside, I'm like, I kind of wish I could do that. I kind of wish I could just kick back and not worry about, hitting that PR in 2 weeks.
Dude, that right there that's awesome, man. That's really, really awesome. That is self-awareness.
Yes.
And self-awareness, at least in my experience, is as simple as putting in one process, like you said, just don't. This person, hold on, this the person deserves whatever I can't believe. Hold on, just because, dude, if they deserve punishment, fucking go at it. You know what I'm saying? If they deserve to be called a piece of shit, sure. But let's just check our notes. Let's just make sure before we press fire on that. And that's really awesome, man. That's really awesome that you're able to see someone enjoying the process of training, working out, having fun with it,
right,
enjoying it, and going, they need to get serious. Let's lock in, man. We're working hard. This is serious.
Yep.
And then going, part of you is going like, not really. It doesn't have to be serious. And you're like,
what's funny is it makes it okay for me now, because I realize it doesn't mean that I have to be them. I don't have to start being lax in my workouts.
Yeah.
I can still train, to the intensity that I do, but understanding that they're not doing anything wrong. This is just the way they're doing their process versus mine. And I have that option to change that if I want to, but I just choose not to at this point in time.
That's right. And you're choosing it.
Yeah.
That is another degree of this routine becoming a choice.
Yep. And it's accountability. You realize that I'm making this choice. I can't blame anybody else.
Yeah.
This is on me,
Oof.
Heavy,
That's tough stuff, man.
Yeah. But you know what? It gets lighter. I'm telling you, it's the more you realize these things, it's like I just kind of pack them into the back of my head, and it's there now, and I can use this. This is my arsenal. This is how I get through life.
That, man, there's something about my experience in life that I want it to be heavy. I want it to be serious. I want it to be,
Yeah.
And so when I feel that Alan Watts is someone that uses the analogy loosening the shoe whenever he talks about some Zen Buddhism and stuff like that, or, one thing he says is that laughter and stress are the same energy, just expressed differently. If you're looking for your fucking, why are my keys, whatever, and you've got this thing, and then you look over and your friend's like got them in their nose or something. You're like, it's the same feeling. It's a joke. You're stressed before you realize the point of it.
Right.
And especially as a man, you feel like kind of some hardness and some toughness and some frustration. Like aggression is so closely linked to power.
Right.
And so feeling aggravated that you can't find your keys is almost preferable for most people than finding out your friend has them in their nose. Because then that's, laughing feels relaxing.
Yeah.
And I'm not relaxed. I'm a man. I'm supposed to be tense and, that kind of thing. So it can be, there's a lot of reasons that it can be really tough to begin to accept that maybe you're not suffering. Maybe you're not being subjected to torture in this life. Maybe you just haven't got quite the best vantage point on the situation yet.
Right.
And if you were to give up your idea of who you are as this strong overcomer man who destroys obstacles and all these things, which are great qualities, by the way, those aren't things that I think you should grow out of, but place in the right position.
Right.
If your personality is burdening you, that strengthens you. And when in opposition, that strengthens you. Having an identity of someone who's an overcomer. I destroy obstacles in my way. Hell yeah. But that's a tool like anything else.
Right.
It fits in a personality trait in certain times that are great. But if that feeling of If your identity is the person who overcomes difficult situations, then you might find yourself unconsciously creating yourself difficult, frustrating situations so that you can continue to exist.
Right. You've heard the analogy of the warrior in the garden?
Yeah, but please.
Yeah, well, I haven't read, there's a bunch of stuff on it, but when I first heard it talked about, it clicked. It was just like, okay, I've been the warrior my entire life to the point where that's all I know. So I keep looking for the next fight. I always look for the next conflict. Yeah. Where the warrior in the garden, he's ready for the next conflict, but he's going to be in peace, tending to the garden, allowing things to grow around him while he waits. And that's something that led me to trying to understand, and this is something that I'm maybe shouldn't talk about too much because my level of understanding is not there yet, but the anima and the animus. Okay. What Carl Jung talks
Feminine
about.
and masculine.
Yes, exactly. So, every man has a little bit of the feminine, and every woman has a little bit of the masculine.
Or a large amount.
Which is possession, literally. I mean, that's what Jung called animus possession or anima possession, depending. And I think that's what we see a lot of in society today because, people might debate this if they want, but there's definitely a demasculinization of the male gender in society today. And it's a lot of the females, it's going in the opposite direction. And I think that a lot of that is because of animus possession. That's just my opinion. But for me, understanding that I had some level of femininity in me, and that sounds weird, especially to a tough guy that's listening to this, but that understanding allowed me to experience compassion.
Absolutely.
Experience the ability to accept compassion from others. It helped me open up to the point where I could never cry in front of anyone, and I understood that was okay. That was something that you needed to do every once in a while.
Yeah.
Not saying that you go far in the other direction and just cry at every little thing, but
you don't want to lose those skills,
right?
And
yeah,
that's the difficulty with that's the difficulty with over identifying with a specific persona, like a specific set. You say,
right.
I'm a man, sure, you have masculine traits, you have feminine traits, and it's the desire for us to control the outcome, the way that they express themselves, that gets us into trouble.
Right.
Your soul is beautiful, and it is okay the way that it is. And if you would just relax the tension around it, then it might show itself in this very strong, reliable, responsible warrior. And it also might show itself in this creative, sensual, creator that is more about feeling than doing.
Right.
And then you might find that these two get so close that they interwoven themselves into somewhat of a unique personality. That's the weird thing, man, with we identify a lot as like the gatekeeper to what we show people about our personality,
right.
And then we don't think in our mind that we do have, like as a man, most men are really afraid of finding out that they're feminine.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
And you go like, dude, finding out that you're feminine is just true. It's just honesty. It's just being honest and being authentic.
Let's define that. Feminine doesn't mean that you're going to go put on a dress and cross dress or something like that, which if that's your thing, whatever, but it means that you're going to identify with the feminine traits that are part of human nature, the compassion, even the maternal instinct.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Some of the care, it's the nurturing. It's an
Exactly.
emotionally present, nurturing energy. And it seems to be more of a sensing, more of a receiving, and more of even a sensual type thing.
Sure.
As masculine might be more of a doing and protecting and
right.
defending and shield and armor and force,
And also, objectivity versus, the male mind being more analytical and the female mind being more emotional based. That sometimes crossover sometimes is very beneficial, because not only do you give yourself more options when you can, allow to experience your emotions, you understand other people's emotions. Yeah. So when a female is reacting emotionally to something, by understanding your own emotions, you can understand theirs and give them more understanding.
Yeah.
It's interesting. My wife always says that men and women are not supposed to trade places. We're supposed to complement each other and be a unit, work together as a unit. And it's so funny because, if you think biologically, that's how we fit. You know what I mean? It's how nature intended it to be. And I know this is treading on some scary ground politically, but I really don't care. It's if everyone had the same opinion on this, what would the world be? But my opinion is that we are meant to complement each other. We are meant to work together as a unit. And to do that, we have to understand enough of each other to work together. So.
And whatever your relationship looks like, whatever your relationship setup is, I think that understanding or considering the idea that the feminine and the masculine energies being held in each person is something that doesn't need to be controlled. It doesn't need to be suppressed. You don't have to suppress your desire to be seen. And your partner doesn't have to suppress their desire to be appreciated and to be celebrated.
Right.
Those are awesome things. We are dynamic humans. We have a soul that is, if reincarnation is a thing, the last life, maybe it wasn't, last life we might have been a totally different personality with totally different expressions, and being willing, being open to learning about yourself as it spontaneously reveals itself to you, learning about yourself is, I think, one of the keys to living a more aware life.
100%. I agree. It's funny. You said, talking about the soul and then reincarnation at the same time. It's, in my opinion and from what I've learned, if you have a soul, reincarnation has to be a thing, because the soul it's just like the law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed, only transferred, and we are energy.
Yeah.
So, and I know this is kind of going a different direction, but it's important to understand that, and this is something that I heard, and I love this quote, is that we are spiritual beings having a human experience.
That's awesome.
Because that soul is universal. It's forever, and whether it reincarnates, recycles into the next form, or we ascend to a God form and become part of what a lot of people call source consciousness itself, it still exists.
A huge hang-up is the over-identification with either A, your current incarnation, who you are. I'm Braxton. I'm this man. I have this life situation. This is who I am. It started when I was born and it ended right today. Yep. That's my story, 26 years. Or, that one I would say there's another thought process that you could try on for size that says maybe you've been at this for a while. Maybe your soul is reincarnated. Maybe in your last life you were a totally different person with a different life, and that's been going on forever. That would be nice. But if that doesn't fit, if you go like, I don't know, that doesn't fit with me in terms of my religion. The beautiful part of that philosophy, though, can be applied within the multiple lifetimes that are within this lifetime. You have the 10 years of life. You have then 7 years where you're working to be a car salesman and you start doing cocaine, and now you're like this speed-driven guy who's all about success. And then you have 8 more years where you fall in love and you become a lover and you learn to listen and learn that your value is not just on what you can produce, but also the presence you can cultivate. And then you have children or something. I haven't had kids, so I can't talk much about it. But the point of, if you can't get down with reincarnation, no worries. This episode can still be for you.
Yep.
Get down with the idea that we change. Get down with the idea that you're learning more about yourself. And get down with the idea that maybe the person that you are right now worked for now.
Right.
And that there might be, if you get quiet enough, this shifting dynamic expression of who you are that you are limiting because you've already signed contracts that I won't look like this, I won't express myself like this, it's not ideal to be this way, and you've got this stack of like restrictions on your personality. And if you can't get down with the reincarnation thing on a life, death, then seeing how an over fixation on an identity can keep you from growing and keep you from developing and realizing that, oh, I was really wrong on that.
Right.
And 10 years from now, like I really do hope that 10 years from now I'm a much, much different person. If not, if I'm just a more solid Braxton and more rigid belief structures the way that I believe now, I don't know that I'm really participating in the way that I at least feel like is ideal.
Sure. And to take it, another step with the, if you can't get on board with reincarnation, you can still, if you are religious and you do believe in an afterlife, you still have that idea that there is something beyond this mortal realm. You know what I mean? And it gives them, it always gives you something to look forward to. You know what I mean? This is not the end. I think that legacy is one of the most important things that we have to leave in this world. And that's what we leave behind to be remembered by. If you think about the old stories of heroes long gone by, years and years, their tales were told around campfires and then written down in books. And then they inspired countless people throughout the ages. That's a legacy. That's something that, you and I are working towards. Every day we try to build something that's going to leave behind an imprint in this world. And when we go to the next life, whether it be another life or the afterlife, I don't think we're ever disconnected from that. I think that gives us our worth. And this is my personal belief. You can look at different belief systems that talk about once a person passes on, the more they're remembered, the better their seat in the afterlife is. And it's interesting because it just kind of feels right, So I don't think that, unless you're an atheist, and if you're an atheist, then your setup to what you laid it out was perfect, But I think anybody who has a belief system where it gives them an option after they leave this mortal world, there's something else there. I kind of went off on a tangent there, but
Let's talk specifically about shadow work and Carl Jung.
Okay, yeah.
In a nutshell, what has your experience been like? Have you read any of his books? Have you listened to podcasts talking about it, listened to teachers talk about it? What have you consumed from Carl Jung? And then what's the reverberation in your life look like from the stuff you've run into?
So before I ever knew who Carl Jung was, I had an understanding of synchronicities. Now, for anybody who doesn't know what a synchronicity is, it's a meaningful coincidence. Let me think of an example.
Like when 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, a friend of mine who's a trainer here, both of his parents died on the same week.
Right.
And he had to leave to go out of town to Chicago. And when I got the news that a second parent had passed and he was brokenhearted, I left to go to Chicago. And I hated to leave because time with my family is really precious to me. But I had to go be there for my brother,
Right.
And as I'm leaving, it was a difficult decision to go financially, time-wise, to get on a flight and go visit him, just to be there for him. But I felt like it was the right thing to do. And as my girlfriend's dropped me off at the airport, I give her a hug, and I look in the back seat, and there's a little bag of Sun Chips. She likes Sun Chips. Give her a hug. See you later. Go to this flight, get to Chicago, go to my uncle's house who lives up there who I'm staying with. And when I walk in the door, I'm tired from the travel. And here I am doing what I feel like I'm supposed to be doing, although it's tiring and costly. And I walk in, the first thing I see on the kitchen counter is a bag of Sun Chips, the exact same kind and the same exact Ziploc bag.
You are where you were meant to be.
And I felt for a moment, I go, okay, all right. Yeah.
It's something that simple. That's a great example, better than I could give. So throughout life, I experienced those in such a heavy volume that it always made me think that, there's something trying to tell me something, somebody's trying to tell me something. And, in my younger years, it was God or, Odin or, whoever the higher power that I found most connected to at that point in time. So I tended to try to analyze them and try to figure out what they meant. And it wasn't until I started to understand more about synchronicities and look into Carl Jung that I realized that the meaning is not necessarily in the synchronicity itself. It's in what's surrounding it. You know what I mean? Just that, like your situation, it wasn't the sun chips. That wasn't the synchronicity. It had nothing to do with that. You know, it had to do with the event surrounding you seeing that twice, you know, something that simple. So awareness was my go-to. Anytime I had a synchronicity, I would become aware, and I would
stop for a second.
Exactly. Just like we talked about earlier, you know, because, and when you have these synchronicities, there's a feeling that goes along with it. At least there is for me, you know, because I'm just like, whoa, there it is, you know, and then I look at the clock and it's 11:11. And then I start to wonder if I watch one too many YouTube videos, you know? but seriously, like what are the chances, you know? So I'm like, okay, what's going on right now? You know, what's happening? And that went on for a while.
You're saying that the synchronicities were like a kind of a mindfulness spell in a way. It like kind of wakes you up for a second, and it like goes, wait, what's going on?
Yes.
It's like a just don't reminder from life.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. Sometimes it's a just do. Sometimes it's a just don't. You know, but it's to be aware of what you're doing at that very moment, and you know how it's going to affect you in your life. So, a good example was for me when I was working out at the gym that I train at right now. I was having synchronicities every time I went in there. It was crazy, and then the clock thing was all the time. You know, if I was doing cardio and I looked down and I'm like, I was on this machine for 11 minutes and 11 seconds. I'm like, you know, in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, come on. But then it started to make me realize that the reason I was seeing this is because this was part of a path. This was something that I needed to pursue in order to get to the next step of my path. And that's exactly what happened. And that's why I work there now, you know, as a trainer, because it brought me to that specific milestone.
So for you, the synchronicities were guiding arrows pointing to a different direction.
Exactly.
Where's the shadow work come in?
Well, the shadow work, that's separate, I guess you'd say. The realization of what synchronicities were, and me understanding, you know, that this whole world of psychology was out there, led me to research more about it. And that's what led me to shadow work. And when I started to look into shadow work, the first thing I did was start to understand the concept of the persona. The persona, you know, for anybody who doesn't know, that's the face that we put on for everyone. And it makes it sound like, you know, well, everybody's fake. Well, in a way we are, because in society we have to at least give only a part of who we truly are, because our self is so much more complex and deep that most people couldn't handle it. Like, you know, if you knew every little thing about me, you know, you may have a different opinion that you would if you just knew my persona. Now, your persona is who you are, but it's just a fraction of it, you know. So for me to understand the persona, go ahead.
I was just going to say that a really great way to think about it in your mind, if you're new to shadow work, new to Carl Jung, new to these terms, is like you have a spectrum of personality traits that you're capable of expressing. And your self, your true self, is the full spectrum of those personality traits.
Correct.
To different variations and degrees based on your soul, based on your, like, a natural expression. As you're growing up in your community and your family and your sports, people of influence kind of push and mold some of these things further down into they're less pervasive, I guess you'd say, or less prominent. So you take some personality traits and you go, we don't like creativity. You know, we're not that. We're this. We like this. We like achievement. We don't like expression. We like, you know, this is the dream of your family and the dream of your community. And so once you're an adult, you have this picture that you've created, this setup of personality traits that are in the light. Some have been pushed down into the unconscious. Some have been repressed and said, we don't do that. We're not sexually expressive. We're not creative. We're not aggressive. We don't get mad. You know, we push these things down. And so what you have left are the traits that were encouraged. And your persona is those things. just the positive things, the things that in your community were celebrated, the things that in your family were encouraged. And the shadow, the thing that exists behind the persona, are all the traits of your personality, all of your potentiality that exist not in the light, not things that were encouraged, but things that were suppressed. So that's a good way that I think about persona and shadow.
I love that. That's a very good description of it, and the shadow as well. For me, it was, and I'm not sure of the way that Jung explains it, whether or not the persona and the ego are two different things, but for me, they were. For me, the ego was the hyper persona, so to speak. You know what I mean?
God, the more than human kind.
Yes, exactly. It was, and like I said, I go to extremes with everything I do, just like with the religion, one way or the other, you know. So for me, I that's how I am in life. And so my persona was who I am. And then I had this hyper persona that was the ego that I put even farther forth, that was in your face. And it's when I walked into a room, that's the first thing you saw, you know. And I realized that a lot of that wasn't who I truly was, or I wasn't sure if that's who I truly was. That's a better way to say it.
Especially when you have to try to do it.
Right.
And it's a thing you're consciously trying to do.
Exactly.
You're like, okay, this is something I'm using.
Yeah.
This isn't me. This is something I'm using to elicit a certain response or a certain social position.
It's work. And now this is going to go into my story that we talked about a little bit the other day, with the practice that I took upon myself to try to better myself. I wanted to transcend. I wanted to attain a higher level of consciousness, ascend, so to speak. And I still do. You know, that's still the goal. But I understood that the first thing I needed to do was to strip away my ego. And so I started to do that.
Being that thing that you kind of lead the room with, that you want to make sure people remember you by.
Yes. So I started to silence myself in a lot of ways. And after that, I started to analyze every little thing of my persona and my ego and pull them apart. And almost
ask why.
What's that?
And ask why.
Yeah. And well, not so much ask why at first. And I guess this is kind of my own misunderstanding of the process, because I did this on my own. And from what I understand, most people do this under the tutelage of a mentor or something. I stripped it all away. I just got rid of it.
I am nothing.
Yeah. Well, that's if you talk to a lot of these like spiritual leaders, that's what it comes down to, is we are nothing. We are not, you know, like I said, we're a spiritual entity that is part of something so much bigger that this is just a small fraction. So I started stripping away these things to the point where I really started to question, what was I? Was I anything? Did I have any worth whatsoever?
There's that personality again. I'm amazing, incredible. I'm God. I hung the moon. Oh, I don't even exist.
Exactly.
I don't even.
No, it's a perfect example.
I don't even exist. I'm not even here.
I went to such an extreme that it led me to what Carl Jung called the dark night of the soul. And the dark night of the soul is basically where you lose meaning. You lose the meaning in your life. You question everything. Why am I here? What is my worth? There is none. There's nothing. And
is the dark night of the soul that point where you question it and you realize that your path is maybe, why am I this far down this trail at this time? Or is it when it drops down into the nihilism of like, what's the point of anything? And then it just is this kind of like dead, like, who cares? What's it matter?
Yeah, well, that's what happens if you stay there. Okay. You know, to me, it was like I got down there and I had a choice, just like, you know, with everything.
Like, this is not it.
Yeah.
This sucks. That, like, right. the way, when I think Dark Night of the Soul, the association in my head is like, nothing seems to deliver anymore.
Exactly.
I've tried the work. I've tried the women. I've tried the drugs. I've tried the experiences. I have done it. And the thing that I thought was underneath a rock somewhere is under none of them.
Exactly.
You know?
And the one thing that I tell people that usually shocks them is I've even lost my belief in my ancestral religion. You know, so I don't call it.
That's spirit. Yeah.
It's my spirituality, my Germanic paganism that, you know, has been a huge part. I mean, I've got runes tattooed on my neck. It speaks very loudly of who I am. So losing that was like the kicker. That was just like, okay,
Yeah.
where do I go from here? So one thing I do is I visualize things to try to make sense of them. And my visualization of this was me emptying out a closet. I had a closet that was cluttered of all these things that I put in there throughout my entire life. And it was just full. It was overflowing. So I started taking them out.
And you lugged it everywhere to show it off. You know,
Yeah.
everywhere you went, you put it in like a red wagon.
Yeah.
You're like, look at me. This is
Yep.
who I am. And don't forget that part. You know?
Exactly. Exactly. So through that process, I uncluttered the closet. It was empty though, because then there was nothing in it. And at that point, I realized like I had a choice. I can go through life like this, or I can start over, which is, you know, what you're supposed to do.
It's part of it.
Right.
It's like a reincarnation within the same carnation.
Exactly.
Or incarnation.
So I started putting things back in the closet in a specific order, mindfully, neatly, and at a certain level of importance, you know, and some things didn't go back. You know, my beliefs absolutely went back. And I was, you know, that was that realization made me very happy, you know, like it brought joy to my heart because it was important to me. And that's another thing. It's realizing what's actually important to you and not important that everybody else knows about you is huge.
It's a real expression of who you are.
Exactly. So now, having put everything back in the closet, you know, I'm able to work with a much better source of, you know, who I am.
Yeah.
And it's always going to be a work in progress.
Yeah, man. That process of letting it go, though, is tough. But
It is.
But the thing is, too, like there's something that a friend of mine said that once you begin a spiritual path, you don't stop. Like it started. You begin to move down this process of waking up from life passing you by. The idea of mindfully choosing your routine and how you spend your time becomes less of a interesting thing and more of this force from behind you saying, wake the fuck up. You've got to do this. You have to.
Right.
These clothes, the rack is falling apart. Like either you begin taking some of the load off or it's just going to collapse and then you will die. You know, psychologically, you'll just cement into this pile of old personality traits that you're still trying to. Then your personality becomes this guy trying to string it back up. You know,
Right.
For me, man, it changed in an instant. I was at a concert with my best friend, and I was on a lot of LSD, and I've done a lot of LSD, a lot of times, and love LSD. But it had been a really long day, and he was exhausted, and he collapsed in the middle of this concert, completely unconscious. And I thought that something had gone horribly wrong with him. And so I dropped down to pick him up and go like, hey, man, and he's just completely unresponsive. And so that moment, what I felt like I was witnessing was my friend had just died. And I'm trying to get him to come back. I'm trying to feel a pulse. I'm telling someone to go run and get some help. And I'm freaking out, man. And probably about 20 seconds or so go by of just this panic. And then finally he and sits up and kind of starts shaking it off. And in that moment, man, I had already left the train. I was already on the train of my brother. I mean, I got one brother, blood brother. Mm-hmm. My best friend in the fucking world, Christian, is my fucking other brother.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that moment, thinking that I lost him. Now, of course, LSD takes whatever you're feeling and says, like, what would happen if we took this and drove it up to the 100th feeling and then multiply that? So the feeling of loss and the feeling of grief started with him laying on the ground and trying to get him up, the panic. Once he sat up, I kind of knew that he was, like, I could see that he was not dead, but in here, that had already gone. I was already, like, mourning this loss.
Right.
And the next 2-3 hours were this very, very peculiar experience where I felt, I mean, you know, when you lose somebody, you lose a part of yourself.
Sure. Yes.
And I felt myself like he pulled a plug out, and just my personality was just draining out. And man, I laid down on the ground by my brother, and he was like, "Are you all right?" And I just said, "No, I'm not." And I felt the intensity of this experience, man. Now, of course, LSD is a hell of a drug. All my other friends are just like, "Oh, Christian's okay. You know, you got too hot." You know, the intensity of this, man, I felt my entire personality collapse like a house of cards.
Wow.
And for the next 3 hours or so, we left early. I'm like, bro, I got to go home. Like, I'm not okay. You know, I'm really not okay. And my brother's like, no doubt, man. So we left, went back home, and I was hollow, like a bamboo. Just,
right.
I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't think anything. The only thing that I could feel was like a very gentle, subtle pleasantness when I saw something that was nice. Like someone might walk by the car and they might smile, you know?
Right.
And I would feel like, oh, that's nice. But this guy that I've been, this hard driving, impressive, successful act that I had mastered, I didn't know where it was. Like I couldn't find it.
Right.
And I didn't know what was going on. Over the next couple hours, I started to feel myself settle out of the shock, so where I didn't feel dissociated anymore. I didn't feel out of place as much and confused, but I didn't have my tools that I had reached for all the time to impress people and to demonstrate myself to others were not there. And the things that I cared about had in an instant shifted. And I didn't even know what they had shifted to.
Right.
And so, man, really, for the next 6 months after that was so painfully difficult, because I mean, there were many days where after that I sat at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday bawling because I could not get my brain to start, to do, to go,
right.
I mean, come on, snap out of it. What are we doing? Like we love to work. We love to, I mean, think about it. We're trying to build a business and get some money and a jet and be successful. Don't we care about that shit? And my brain was like, not really. And it was like, dude, what are we doing? We have to wait. We have to get back in the saddle. And it had changed. It had shifted on me. And so for the next 6 months, this is like a year of experience after this, I'm learning about myself. I'm learning about this different Braxton. He really enjoys time with his friends.
Yep.
You know, he really enjoys time with his family. Weirdly enough, he enjoys conversation. You know, the success stuff, just doesn't get his dick hard anymore.
Yep.
It used to. And that 6 months of sheer confusion and panic of I'm losing it. I'm losing everything that I've cared about. I can't even get myself to care about being this hard driving successful guy. 6 months later after that, I'm starting to find that it's not that I don't care anymore. It's I care about different things. And then the year after that, leading up to, the last year or so, probably a year and a half ago, I'm starting to find out, like, that version of myself that I had created with pursuit of one thing alone, and that was material success. In the fortunate, although it seemed horrible at the time, incident that under the influence of a hallucinogen, an extremely potent psychedelic, I experienced the loss of something that was lower on my totem pole.
Yep.
It blew the whole thing apart and moved connection, companionship, family, and an experience and being present for play and connection to the very top. And that has been incredible, man. I mean, that has been such an interesting journey.
It sounds like it. I mean, to me, it sounds like you got your dark night of the soul rammed down your throat.
You're exactly right.
And I mean, there's people that pay a lot of money for, getaways to go do that, under the influence of a shaman, and you just,
And that's what I was trying to remember why I brought it up. That's exactly the point. Like it was, none of this matters anymore.
Right.
And you have to, like, just as an encouragement of love, like, it's all right. Let it happen. Let it happen, because you are resilient. Your soul is resilient. You didn't lose it all. You just realized it was the wrong path. And
right.
all of the fixation and the ideology that went behind driving you down this path moved away. And it might happen rapidly if your friend dies in an LSD experience, or it might happen gradually as you realize that your soul values different things than it did 10 years ago. Because in one way, you're just rehearsing what you used to value 10 years ago.
Right.
And I was chasing 24/7 the 15-year-old version of Braxton's wet dream, and now he's 25 and he doesn't care about that stuff the same way he used to. And he needed the refresh button,
Yeah, I understand 100%. It's, and moving on from there, it's interesting where all that power goes, because you talk about the drive and the push towards success and everything like that. For me, and we talked about this a little bit earlier too, is the dark night of the soul. It took probably about that long for me to really kind of start putting things back together to where I knew who I was. One of the things I remember vividly is not being able to write ritual for our spiritual gatherings, something that I was always very good at, and I could always draw a lot of inspiration from all our people. And not being able to do that was a huge setback. And it took time for me to get to where I could start doing it again, but it wasn't the way it was. I didn't have like the force behind it. And then when it culminated was, and you asked about this earlier, was my wedding. So we got married on Halloween of last year. It was a awesome time. Everyone was dressed up, and we based it all around the Germanic wedding ritual that our pagan ancestors did. And so I remember working on it with my wife and going through the motions, talking to the men in my war band, our crew, so to speak, explaining to them how we were going to do things. We were chanting runes. We were, walking to the altar together. I had a wolf pelt on, our theme was, she was Red Riding Hood, so she had the red cloak. I was the big bad wolf.
That's cute, man.
Yeah. So, and then one of my brothers performed the ceremony for us. And in that moment, I started to become fulfilled again with the spiritual power that I needed to reinvigorate, that direct conduit with my ancestors and my gods. And that was hugely important to me, but I still didn't really get it. So a few days after my wedding, my ankle swelled up to the size of my calf, and I had this horrible edema. And I go to my wife and I'm like, look at this. I'm like, if this is like this tomorrow morning, I'm going to urgent care. And she's like, bullshit, you're going to the ER right now. So,
I'm the same way, man. I'm like, I'm going to sleep it off. I'll be all right.
Just walk it off. Drink some water. So, my family that came down from Connecticut had just left. Everything was kind of like, winding down. And I go to the ER that night and end up with a deep vein thrombosis in my leg that ran from the top of my thigh all the way down to my calf. And the doctor said they had to remove it. The doctor said it was the biggest blood clot he'd ever seen in his entire life.
Oof. Jesus.
And he had no idea how I was even alive.
This is days after the wedding?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And it really shook me, because I've kind of walked through life with this immortality complex, 10 foot tall, bulletproof, nothing can hurt me. I break a bone, I'll fix it. You know what I mean? It's just how I am. But having something inside me that was killing me from the inside and not realizing it was different,
Immortality.
Yes. So I started to realize that at that point that I was here for a purpose.
About a year ago, huh?
Yep. was here for a purpose, and that purpose had to be bigger than myself.
Yeah.
I could not squander any more time going through the motions and routines that I've been programmed with.
Mindlessly just participating.
Exactly. The day job that I have that, I go to and, work for someone else to be, make millions of dollars. It was not giving me any fulfillment, and it wasn't doing anything bigger than myself, like I said. And so I started to think about it, and that's when I started to think about, the career in fitness and training people, which is something that I did my entire life anyway. I've competed in different...
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
It's kind of just there all along.
Yeah. And it's like, wow, I've wasted a lot of time not doing what I love, or not getting paid for doing what I love.
You're like working out going, man, what should I do with my life?
So that realization made me realize that, as obviously realizations do, that I needed to give this to other people. Like, I need to make other people better, and it was like, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. So I laid out a game plan, and my wife was huge on this because she was like, because she knows how I procrastinate, and she went and got my NASM bundle all prepared and clicked the button and everything. And next thing I know, I'm CPT certified and working on the rest of them, So I was on the right path, but apparently the universe decided that I needed a little bit more of a nudge.
Yeah.
So I woke up one day and couldn't breathe. And I'm like, damn it, I'm sick. I probably got walking pneumonia, because I've heard of people getting walking pneumonia before and not having to be able to breathe, but otherwise they feel okay. So I tell my wife, I think I got walking pneumonia. And she's like, all right, well, let's go to the urgent care. So I go to the urgent care and I start telling them the symptoms. And then they're like, have you ever had a blood clot before? Oof. And I was like, yeah. So now that you mention it, I had
the other day.
Yeah. Well, this is months. This is 3 months later. I tell them about the DVT in my leg, and they're like, well, just in case, we're going to go send you for a CT scan. CT scan comes back. I have pulmonary embolisms in my lungs, 2 occlusions. And they're like, how are you still walking around? PEs kill people all the time. I mean, it's just like that. You know what I mean?
Drop out dead.
Yeah. And, not everybody, but the majority of the people that get them don't live from them. And not only did I live from them, I came back stronger physically. And I'm like, this is it. This is the proof. There has got to be something out there telling me that, and I knew what it was. I knew it was the universe, telling me that I need to continue. I need to push harder. I'm not there yet. There's other people out there that need me to become better so they can become better. Yeah. And that's been my driving force behind everything I've done since then. Working towards this new career, trying to build, a better life for me, my family, and, just give back. I've had a life where I've experienced a lot of ebb and flow, ups and downs. But when I think back, I'm grateful for all the good and bad, because it's given me what I have today.
Yeah.
And we could go through all that. That'd be another couple podcasts worth. But it's in long story short, everything that I've experienced has built and led up to this point right now, this instant. This is where I'm supposed to be. I know that, and knowing that, it sets up the next step. Yeah. The next step after that. And I'm just going to continue. I'm going to continue to build. I'm going to continue to try to contribute as much as I can to the people that, that need me.
Yeah, man. That's really, really awesome. Having the experience of a reorganization of what's important to you, and whether it's a health scare or feeling like you lost someone or losing someone or getting fired or something, like taking hold of that moment and embracing the opportunity to not just not reinvent yourself, because that sounds so kind of like Western, thought process of you can go out there and become somebody.
Yeah.
But to accept the changing nature of you, of
right.
who you are, and to begin to anchor your sense of self to something that pervades those changing life circumstances. And that's one of the reasons Greek mythology to me is super amazing, because it's like, this is, you're participating in a story here. You're participating in a dance that's been going on forever,
right.
and, you're limiting yourself by what you call yourself. You're limiting yourself by who you identify as, and life is trying to fucking change that, man, all the time. And, I just hope that someone listening to this episode feels inspired to just relax their heart a little bit and practice some of that. Just don't,
Yep.
practicing some of the idea that your life is valuable because if you work hard, you can become somebody. Sure, that's an option. Or that life is so much more intelligent than you are, and you're becoming someone might get in the way of that.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, relax. Maybe it's through noticing synchronicities. Maybe it's through just a general sense in your soul of something beginning to kick. Tuning into your body, tuning into your emotions, what's your internal compass telling you? That might mean get off of fucking Instagram. That might be get off the distractions, become more aware, sit, meditate, breathe, drink some tea, and shut the fuck up.
Exactly. If there's any takeaway, that's it. Understand that we're being spoon-fed, these routines and the things that we're doing. It's by design. Understand that if we take a little bit of time to back away from that and see what's really going on, and most importantly, admit that we don't know everything, that there is something much larger and greater out there beyond who and what we are, it might just speak to us.
And then you have I think that to me sounds like the goal of life is to feel connected to a purpose that is larger than yourself. And that to me sounds like the beginning of spirituality. There's a book called Healing the Shame That Binds You.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever read that book before?
No, I'll have to check that one out.
I'm about halfway through it. And what I really like about the way Mr. Bradshaw, I forget his first name, shares is that shame, there's healthy shame and toxic shame. And healthy shame, he says, is the beginning of spirituality. He gives the story of Adam and Eve
right
as a story about ourselves and our unwillingness to accept our position as a human, and that it's our desire to be more than God that then sends us into this. Once they ate from the tree of knowledge and desired to attain knowledge to be like God, then they realized that they were naked. Then they felt shame. Then they dropped down to be less than human. And essentially his whole, try this on for size is that it's the unwillingness to accept that we are human. We are just human. We're just human. It's our desire to be more than human that puts us into this horrible seesaw between either I'm horrible and wretched and unworthy, or I'm God himself.
Yep.
And instead, realizing that we're neither one of those. We're just a human. For me, that has been very humbling. It's been a great reminder. And I think that is in the same vein of the idea of beginning to connect yourself with a purpose that pervades your sense of identity being important, or, being shameful, being less than human is what Mr. Bradshaw says, is that it's just as egocentrical as being God, because you're the best of the worst. You're worse than anyone, and no one loves you, and that kind of thing. Instead, going why all the time spent trying to rationalize our life and try to understand it, why this is happening to me, and how I can be better than this and be better than anyone. I could be number one. Instead of just going maybe you could be the best at what you're doing. Maybe you could just apply yourself like a human, and instead of trying to be impressive to people, be authentic, be reliable, be responsible. Like I'm reminded in the Bible, I believe it's I think it's 2 Timothy. There's a story about King Solomon, I believe, who essentially was the richest man alive and had it all. And towards the end of his life, as he's reflecting on the wisdoms he's gained from having a Marcus Aurelius kind of power,
right?
He's the point of life is to accept your plot, where you are and take good care of that. Enjoy good wine and good food. And it's a much like more lame human experience.
Yeah, it sounds very stoic.
Yeah. Instead of, if you work really hard, you could become someone of significance. Maybe more so. Just if you shut the fuck up and just sit and relax, then you might find that being human itself is the most beautiful, rich experience.
That's the key. Understanding what you're meant to be, and that in itself gives you a significance that all the success in the world is not going to offer you.
Yeah.
Because it's the word you used, authentic.
Yeah.
That's real, and it's what most people in this world lack. And
the success you might achieve is a reward for behavior. It's not. Right. It's not the purpose of it.
Right.
And so we a lot of times it can be confusing when you begin to confuse purpose and your intrinsic desire to express your soul to people, whether that's being compassionate, whether that's being strong, whether that's being creative, whatever it is inside of you, we can link. It's just like the Skinner box. We begin to link. I express my genuine self. Who paid me? Who celebrated me? Anyone? No?
Yep.
I express an inauthentic version of myself. Oh, they clapped, okay, I'll do that.
Yep.
And instead, somehow connecting, and it's deeply spiritual. It's like yoga, doing yoga for the sake of yoga, not to get better at yoga, not so that you can be cool and be famous, but finding a way to remind yourself when you do feel, that's what I'm trying to say, when you do feel lost, when you don't know where to go. Most of the options we have available to us, especially in America, is very industrial. It's very become. It's very, right. You can go and get something. Get what's yours. Sure, try those on. But maybe also consider a life not about achievement, but of expression. And that might afford you some more options.
Sure. Definitely. That sums it up pretty good. What you brought to mind about, finding something bigger than yourself reminds me of the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, and we all go through that whole cycle, finding a mentor, failing, redemption, every step of it. It's in our life, and there's a significance that we just have to take away from each step. Everything we do has meaning. And I think that's the most important thing, is realizing that even the routines, even the mundane routines that we go through day by day that we don't realize we're doing, if you start understanding the meaning in them or meaninglessness in them, you can prioritize and grow.
Yeah, exactly right, man. You start doing a little audit on your activities based on meaning.
Yep.
Not just based on reward. That's one of the difficult things too about the age of social media, is that as I distribute content like this online, there's some things that get in really incredible responses, and 100 plus thousands of people that'll check it out and share it. And then there's some that I think are amazing expressions of a beautiful truth, and it's like 10 people are like, that's all right, it's okay.
Yeah.
And
I've
so
experienced that.
And there's a little bit of like not just blindness, because I don't like the way that sounds. Instead, just changing what you judge what you're doing by. And instead of saying like, what's the reward I'm getting from this? What's the response I'm getting from this? How many people celebrate me? How much money do I make based on my routines? And instead saying like, when I sit and I get really quiet and I list the things in my life that if I lost them, I'd cry the most. And I use that as some kind of meaning equation. These are the things that are meaningful to me. How does the way I spend my time promote the well-being of that list? And that might be, regardless of the likes or comments on your videos or the amount of money you get on your paycheck, you might begin to find some type of alignment between what's meaningful and how you spend your time. And that is fucking awesome.
Yeah. That's the meaning of life.
Hey, look at that. Chris, I really I enjoyed this conversation, man.
Absolutely. Definitely.
Seriously.
Brought to light a lot of good things. And what I love most about these types of things, it's thought-provoking.
Yeah.
As much as I said, I learned.
Yeah.
So Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Yep.